The machine hummed as it wrapped around Alia Vasquez like a metal cocoon. Blue lights moved across her skin. She stayed very still and tried not to breathe too fast. This was the moment that would decide everything for Earth. Station Villa 9 floated in the cold darkness between stars. It was a place where new species came to be judged. The Galactic Coalition had been watching Earth for 50 years. Now they had finally made contact, and they wanted to know one simple thing. What were humans worth? Alia was 34 years old. She had brown skin, short black hair, and the lean body of someone who ran very long distances for fun. Back on Earth, she was a scientist who studied alien life. She had also finished 12 marathons. The United Nations had chosen her because she was smart, calm, and strong in ways that did not show on the outside. The cat who operated the machine looked like a giant praying mantis made of black glass. His name was Chronicler Yith, and his job was to measure the power of new species. He had done this work for 200 years. He had seen creatures that could lift mountains. He had seen beings made of living fire. He had never seen anything quite as small and soft as a human. "The scan is complete," Yith said. His voice sounded like clicking stones. "I will now read your results." Alia stepped out of the machine. The room was cold and white. Other Keth officials stood in the corners, watching her with eyes like black marbles. She felt like a bug under a microscope. Yith looked at a floating screen. His mandibles clicked together in a way that Alia was beginning to understand meant disappointment. "Strength Index, 2.3, he read. "The galactic average is 15. Speed Index, 1.8. Reflex Index, 4.1. He paused and looked at her. "These are very low numbers." Alia had expected this. Humans were not the strongest or fastest creatures, even on their own planet. Gorillas were stronger. Cheetahs were faster. But humans had something else, something harder to measure. "What about the other scores?" she asked. Yith made a sound like rustling paper. It might have been a laugh. "There is one anomaly. Your sustainability quotient shows an error. The machine says the test needs to be done again. This happens sometimes with primitive species. The readings are too low for the system to process correctly." Alia noticed that the screen showed strange symbols next to that score. Red warning lights blinked around it. But Yith did not seem interested. He was already typing on another screen. "Based on these results," he announced, "humans are classified as labor-ineligible, fragile class. You will be given housing in the low-priority section of the station. The Coalition will decide what to do with your species later." The words hit Alia like a punch. Fragile class. It meant that humans were considered too weak to be useful, too weak to matter. "Is there any way to change this classification?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but her heart was beating fast. Yith looked at her for a long moment. His black eyes showed nothing. "The numbers do not lie. Your species is simply limited." Two Keth guards came forward to escort her out. As they walked through the long metal hallways of the station, Alia saw other species moving around her. A creature that looked like a bear made of rock stomped past. A being with 6 arms and glowing blue skin floated by on a platform. They all looked at her with what she could only describe as pity. She was taken to a small room with a hard bed and a single window that looked out at the stars. It was clean, but empty. A room for someone who did not matter. Alia sat on the bed and thought about home. She thought about the mountains she had climbed, the deserts she had crossed, the races she had run when her body screamed at her to stop, but she kept going anyway. The Keth machine had measured her strength and found it wanting. But it had not measured the thing that made humans different from every other creature on Earth. It had not measured her will. The next morning, a small drone brought her food and information about the station. Most of it was boring rules about where she could go, what she could touch, who she could talk to. But one thing caught her attention. The Crucible Trials was a competition held every cycle for species who wanted to improve their status in the coalition. The trials tested endurance, survival, and mental strength. Any being could enter, regardless of their classification. Winners earned respect and better treatment for their entire species. Ilya read the description 3 times. The trials were dangerous. Many competitors did not finish. Some did not survive. But the rewards were worth the risk. She found Yith in his office later that day. The chronicler was surprised to see her. "The human," he said. "Is there a problem with your housing?" "No," Ilya said. "I want to register for the Crucible Trials." Yith stared at her. For a moment, he did not move at all. Then his mandibles clicked rapidly, the Keth version of shocked laughter. "That is not possible," he said. "The Crucible is designed for species with power indices of 10 or higher. You would die in the first trial." "The rules say any being can enter," Ilya replied. "I read them carefully. The rules exist for species who have a chance of survival. You are a fragile class. Your strength index is 2.3. You would be competing against predators, warriors, beings that could crush you with one limb." Ilya smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. Then it should be easy for them to beat me. Yith studied her for a long time. Something flickered in his dark eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or confusion. He had measured thousands of species. He had never seen one so weak show so little fear. "Very well," he said finally. "I will register you. But I want you to understand something. Human. The Crucible does not care about courage. It does not reward foolishness. It only cares about results." "I understand," Ilya said. She turned and walked out of his office. Behind her, Yith looked at his screen. The error message for her sustainability quotient was still blinking. He dismissed it with a wave of his claw. It was probably just a glitch in the system. The arena was enormous. It stretched out like a small world under a dome of glass and metal. Ilya stood at the entrance with 11 other competitors and tried not to show her fear. She was by far the smallest being there. To her left, a creature with 8 powerful limbs, scales like armor, and teeth that could bite through steel. Its power index was 22. It looked at Ilya the way a wolf might look at a rabbit. To her right was a Sindith, a being made of living silicon. Its body was gray and rough like stone, and it radiated heat. The Sindith could survive in volcanoes. It had a power index of 19. Behind her, a Kalani was being lowered from a water tank. The Kalani were an aquatic species with 4 hearts and skin that could change color. On land, it moved in a special suit that kept it wet. Its power index was 17. And then there was Ilya. Power index 2.3. The other competitors had already heard about the human who had registered for the Crucible. Some of them laughed when they saw her. Others simply ignored her, as if she was not worth noticing. Only the Kalani looked at her with something like sympathy. "First trial, heat endurance," announced a booming voice from above. The Keth judges sat in a floating platform high above the arena. Chronicler Yith was among them, watching with his black marble eyes. The rules were simple. All 12 competitors would enter a sealed chamber. The temperature would rise slowly and steadily. When a competitor could not take the heat anymore, they would signal their surrender and be removed. The last one standing would win. This trial tests the body's ability to regulate internal temperature. The voice continued. It measures thermal tolerance, metabolic stability, and survival instinct. The Sindith made a grinding sound that might have been a laugh. "This trial is already won," it said to the Vorak. "I was born in fire. Heat is my home." The Vorak snorted. "We shall see. My scales can reflect thermal energy. I have survived the burning sands of Vorus Prime. Neither of them even looked at Elia. The chamber was a large room with walls that glowed faintly orange. Elia walked in with the others and found a spot near the back. The door sealed behind them with a heavy click. At first, the temperature was comfortable. Warm, like a summer day on Earth. Elia took slow, deep breaths. She had trained for marathons in the Arizona desert. She knew heat. The numbers on the wall showed the temperature rising. 30 degrees Celsius. Then 35. Then 40. Some of the competitors began to look uncomfortable. A tall, thin being with feathers started to pant. Its feathers were designed to keep it warm, not to release heat. At 42 degrees, it signaled surrender and was escorted out. Elia's skin grew hot. And then something happened that made all the other competitors stare at her. She began to sweat. What is happening to it? The Synth asked with disgust. It is leaking fluid. Some kind of malfunction, the Vorak guessed. Perhaps its body is breaking down. But Elia was not breaking down. She was cooling herself. Sweat covered her skin, and as it evaporated, it carried heat away from her body. It was a simple trick of biology, something humans had developed over millions of years. Most species in the galaxy did not have this ability. They regulated heat through other means, panting, hiding, or simply being tough enough to endure. The temperature reached 50 degrees. 2 more competitors surrendered. The air shimmered with heat. At 55 degrees, the Vorak began to struggle. Its scales could reflect heat, but not forever. Its internal temperature was rising. It roared in frustration as it signaled surrender. Elia kept sweating. She felt like she was standing inside an oven, but she had felt worse. She remembered running through Death Valley in the middle of July, when the ground was hot enough to cook meat. She remembered telling herself, one more step, until she crossed the finish line. At 58 degrees, the Kelani's suit began to fail. The water inside was turning to steam. It surrendered quickly, panic in its color-changing skin. Now only 4 remained. Elia, the Synth, a small reptile creature called a Thorani, and a strange cloud of floating spores called a Mordith. The Synth looked confident. It was made for heat. Its body was stone and fire, but the temperature kept rising. 60 degrees. 62 degrees. And then something unexpected happened. The Synth began to crack. Its silicon body was tough, but it was not designed for sustained heat at this level. The thermal energy was being absorbed, but not released. Its internal systems were overloading. At 63 degrees, the Synth shattered. Not literally, but its consciousness flickered. It made a horrible grinding scream and signaled surrender. Medical drones rushed in to carry it away. Elia was still standing. Her hair was wet with sweat. Her clothes were soaked through. Her heart was pounding fast. But she was still standing. The Thorani lasted until 65 degrees, before entering a survival torpor, its body shutting down to protect itself. That counted as a surrender. The Mordith, the cloud of spores, dissolved at 67 degrees. It simply could not hold itself together in the heat. The buzzer sounded. The trial was over. Elia collapsed to her knees as cool air flooded the chamber. Medical drones surrounded her, scanning her body. She was dehydrated. Her skin was red. Her muscles were trembling. But she was alive, and she had 1 up in the observation platform. Chronicler Yith was not watching the medical team. He was staring at his screen, at the sustainability quotient reading that had been flagged as an error. The reading had changed. Before, it had said, unresolved, retest required. Now it said, value exceeds parameters hardware limitation. Yith's mandibles clicked nervously. In 200 years of measuring species, he had never seen that message before. The humans should have been the first to fall. Her power index was a joke. Her body was soft and fragile. By every measure the Kef used, she was one of the weakest beings ever tested. And yet she had outlasted creatures that were built for heat. Creatures that lived in fire. Interesting, Youth whispered to himself. Down in the arena, Elia was being helped to her feet. The other competitors, those who were still conscious, watched her with new eyes. The pity was gone. In its place was something else. Confusion, uncertainty. And just a little bit of fear. Elia smiled weakly and wiped the sweat from her face. The first trial was over. 2 more remained. The second trial was called the Long Walk, but it was not a walk at all. It was 200 kilometers of hell. The course ran through 3 different environments: a burning desert, a thick jungle, and a frozen mountain range. Competitors had to cross all 3 without stopping to rest. No sleep, no sitting down. Keep moving or be eliminated. 8 competitors remained after the heat trial. The Vorak had recovered and was eager to prove itself. The Synth had been healed and was angry about its defeat. The Thorani, the cold-blooded reptile, moved with quiet confidence. And the Kelani was back in a new suit, its 4 hearts ready to pump. Elia stood at the starting line with the others. Her body still ached from the heat chamber. She had been given water and food, but not much rest. The Kef wanted to see how species performed when they were already tired. The starting signal sounded a deep horn that echoed across the arena. The Vorak exploded forward. Its 8 limbs moved like pistons, carrying it across the desert sand at incredible speed. In the first hour, it covered 50 kilometers. The other competitors watched in amazement as it disappeared over the horizon. Foolish, the Thorani said quietly. It will burn out. Elia did not sprint. She did not even jog. She walked at a steady pace, her feet finding a rhythm in the sand. 1 step, then another, then another. The Synth passed her, its heavy body grinding across the ground. The Kelani passed her, its suit humming with power. Even a small furry creature called a Marathi passed her, its 6 legs moving quickly. Elia did not speed up. She knew something that the others did not. Back on Earth, millions of years ago, her ancestors had hunted in a very strange way. They did not have claws or fangs or venom. They were not fast enough to catch prey in a sprint. So they did something different. They followed. A human would find an animal and start chasing it. The animal would run away easily, leaving the human far behind. But the human would keep walking, following the tracks, never stopping. The animal would rest, thinking it was safe. Then it would see the human coming again, still walking, still following. It would run again, and again, and again. Eventually, after hours or even days, the animal would collapse. Its body would overheat, its legs would fail, and the human would walk up to it, barely tired, and finish the hunt. They called it persistence hunting. And it was the reason humans had survived long enough to build cities, invent machines, and travel to the stars. Elia walked through the desert. The sun was artificial, but felt real. Heat waves rose from the sand. She sweated, and her body cooled itself. She drank water from her supply pack. She ate small bites of food to keep her energy up. At the 6th hour mark, the news came through her earpiece. The Vorak had collapsed. It had run too fast, too hard. Its powerful muscles had filled with acid. Its efficient body had no way to clear the waste products of extreme exercise. It lay in the sand, unable to move, as medical drones carried it away. Elia kept walking. The desert gave way to jungle. The air became thick and wet. Strange plants grabbed at her legs. Insects buzzed around her face. The ground was soft and muddy, making every step harder. The Kelani was struggling here. Its suit was designed for movement, not for endless travel. At the 12-hour mark, Its four hearts began to beat out of rhythm. The stress was too much. It signaled surrender. Ilya kept walking. Her legs hurt. Her back hurt. Her feet were developing blisters. But she had run marathons with worse pain. She had trained her mind to ignore what her body was telling her. Pain is just information, she told herself. It is not a command. At the 18-hour mark, she entered the mountain zone. The temperature dropped rapidly. Snow covered the ground. The air became thin and hard to breathe. The Thorani was in its element now. Cold-blooded and efficient, it moved steadily up the mountain path. The Sindith was also doing well. Its stone body did not feel the cold. But Ilya had trained in the mountains too. She had climbed peaks where the air was so thin that every breath felt like drinking through a straw. She pulled her thermal jacket tighter and kept moving. At the 20-hour mark, the Mirathi collapsed. Its small body simply could not continue. It had tried to pace itself, but its species was not built for sustained effort. At the 22-hour mark, the Mordith, the cloud of spores, began to scatter. It could not maintain coherence. Pieces of it drifted away in the wind until there was nothing left but empty air. Now only three remained: Ilya, the Thorani, and the Sindith. The finish line was 10 kilometers away. Ilya's vision was blurry. Her muscles screamed with every step. She had been moving for nearly a full day without rest. Her body wanted to stop more than it had ever wanted anything. But she did not stop. The Sindith was slowing down. Its internal systems were not designed for long-term operation. It moved like a machine running out of power. The Thorani was also struggling. Its efficient, cold-blooded body was excellent at conserving energy, but it had never been pushed this hard for this long. At the 22-hour mark, its brain made a decision without asking permission. It entered torpor, a deep sleep that its species used to survive harsh conditions. The Thorani stopped moving in the middle of the path, frozen like a statue. Ilya walked past it. The Sindith saw her coming. It tried to speed up, but its body would not cooperate. It made a grinding, frustrated sound. "How?" it demanded. "How are you still moving?" Ilya did not answer. She did not have the energy for words. She just kept putting one foot in front of the other. 1 kilometer from the finish line, the Sindith stopped. It did not surrender. Its pride would not allow that. But it could not take another step. It stood in the snow, watching as the small, soft, weak human walked past it. Ilya crossed the finish line at the 23-hour mark. She fell to her knees in the snow. Then she fell forward onto her face. Medical drones surrounded her immediately, pumping fluids into her body, wrapping her in warming blankets. Up in the observation platform, Chronicler Yith was speaking rapidly to the other Keth officials. The word he kept using was one that had never appeared in Coalition records before: persistence predator. A creature that did not win through strength or speed. A creature that won by simply refusing to stop. By outlasting everything else until nothing was left standing. The Keth had measured millions of species. They had never found one like this, and they were beginning to realize that their entire system for measuring power might be fundamentally wrong. The High Council chamber was the most important room on Station Velenine. It was a vast circle of black stone, with seats rising up like the inside of a bowl. At the bottom stood a single platform where beings came to be questioned by the most powerful Keth in the sector. Chronicler Yith stood on that platform now, surrounded by the cold stares of 12 high alchemists. "Explain," said the first alchemist. Her voice echoed through the chamber like ice cracking. How did a species with a power index of 2.3 win 2 trials designed for beings 5 times stronger? Yith's mandibles clicked nervously. He had been asking himself the same question for hours. The human female displays unusual characteristics. Unusual? Another alchemist leaned forward. She defeated a Sindith in heat tolerance. She outlasted a Varak in endurance. These are species with proven combat and survival capabilities. Humans are supposed to be fragile, weak, disposable. Yes, Ith agreed. That is what our measurements indicated. Then your measurements were wrong. The words hung in the air. In 2,000 years, no one had ever suggested that Keth measurements were wrong. The Universal Power Index was the foundation of everything the Coalition did. It determined which species were valuable and which were not. It decided who would be allies and who would be servants. If the measurements were wrong, everything was wrong. I have been studying the data, Yith said carefully. He activated a holographic display, showing Elia's biological readings from both trials. The human body does not work like other species. Most beings in the galaxy are designed for efficiency. They can produce great power, but only for short periods. Then they must rest and recover. He zoomed in on a graph showing Elia's muscle activity over time. Humans are different. They produce less power, but they can sustain it for much longer. Their muscles are designed for endurance, not strength. Their cardiovascular system can operate at high levels for hours or even days without failure. That is not possible, the first archivist said. No biological system can operate without rest. Humans can rest while moving, Youth explained. Their bodies cycle between different muscle groups. They can eat and drink while traveling. They can even perform basic cognitive functions while in a state of partial sleep. The archivists were silent. This was beyond anything in their records. Y, I to H, continued. But the most remarkable feature is their thermal regulation. Humans sweat. They excrete water through their skin. As this water evaporates, it removes heat from their bodies. This allows them to remain active in temperatures that would cause most species to overheat and die. He showed them footage from the heat trial. The Sindith cracking from absorbed thermal energy. The Varak collapsing from internal temperature rise. And Elia, standing in the middle of it all, wet with sweat but still functional. The Universal Power Index measures peak output, Yith said. Strength, speed, reflexes, these are all measures of maximum capability. But humans are not built for maximum capability. They are built for sustained capability. Our system was never designed to measure this. The first archivist was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question that everyone was thinking. How did such a weak species survive long enough to develop intelligence? Yith had researched this. The answer had disturbed him deeply. Humans evolved on a planet with many predators stronger and faster than them, he said. They could not win fights through direct combat. So they developed a different strategy. He showed them a reconstruction based on human historical records. A group of early humans following a large animal across an open plain. They would chase their prey for hours, sometimes for days. The prey would run away, but the humans would follow. It would run again. The humans would follow again. Eventually, the prey would collapse from exhaustion and overheating. Then the humans would catch it. The archivists watched the reconstruction in horrified fascination. A creature with a power index of 2 was hunting creatures with power indices of 15 or higher and winning. They call it persistence hunting, Yith said. It is the oldest form of human hunting, and it explains everything we have seen in the trials. The human does not try to win through strength or speed. She wins by refusing to stop. She wins by lasting longer than everything else. This is. The first archivist struggled to find the right word. Terrifying. Yith nodded. There is one more trial remaining. The siege. 48 hours of continuous physical and cognitive challenges. No sleep, no rest. She cannot possibly survive that, another archivist said. No one survives the siege without rest. I would not be so certain, Yith replied. Humans regularly deprived themselves of sleep for days at a time. Their military personnel trained to operate for 72 hours without rest. Their athletes compete in races that last for 100 hours or more. They consider this normal. The chamber fell silent again. The Keth were beginning to understand something that changed everything they thought they knew. They had been measuring power wrong. Strength was not just about how hard you could hit. It was about how long you could keep hitting. Speed was not just about how fast you could run. It was about how far you could run before you stopped. And survival was not just about being tough enough to endure damage. It was about being stubborn enough to keep going when every part of your body was screaming at you to quit. By these measures, humans were not weak at all. They might be the most dangerous species the Coalition had ever encountered. The first archivist made her decision. The final trial will proceed as scheduled. I want every sensor in the arena focused on the human. I want to know exactly what her body does over those 48 hours. And I want our scientists to begin developing a new measurement system, one that accounts for persistence. Eth bowed and left the chamber. As he walked through the corridors of the station, he thought about the small human woman who had turned everything upside down. She was resting now, recovering from the long walk. In 12 hours, the siege would begin. 48 hours of hell that had broken some of the strongest beings in the galaxy. Yith had measured thousands of species. He had never been wrong about one before, but as he looked at Elia Vasquez's file, at the error messages and impossible readings and broken scoring systems, he realized that he had no idea what was going to happen next. And for the first time in 200 years, he was afraid. The siege began at midnight. 6 competitors entered the arena. Elia, the Thorani, the Sindith, and 3 others who had qualified through different trials. For the next 48 hours, they would face a constantly changing gauntlet of challenges. Physical tests, mental puzzles, psychological pressure. The arena would attack them with everything it had, and they were not allowed to stop. No sleep, no rest, no mercy. The first 12 hours were almost manageable. The competitors solved puzzles, climbed walls, navigated mazes, and answered questions while running on treadmills. Alia's body remembered this kind of exhaustion. She had trained for it. She had chosen it. But after 12 hours, things changed. A creature called a North, a being with 3 brains and perfect memory, began to hallucinate. Its multiple minds could not agree on what was real. It started talking to people who were not there. At hour 14, it was escorted out for its own safety. A massive armored being called a Groth collapsed at hour 16. Its body was designed for short, brutal combat, not for endless activity. Its heart simply stopped beating, overwhelmed by the constant demand. Now 4 remained. Elia was suffering. Her muscles burned with a fire that never went out. Her eyes felt like sand had been poured into them. Her thoughts moved slowly, like they were swimming through mud. But she kept moving. The Sindith was struggling too. It had learned from the previous trials and was pacing itself, but silicon bodies were not meant for this. At hour 24, cracks began to appear in its surface. At hour 28, it started losing pieces of itself, small chunks of stone falling off as it moved. At hour 30, the arena threw its cruelest challenge yet. The lights went out. The temperature dropped. And a voice began whispering in the darkness, different for each competitor. For Elia, it whispered about home, about her mother's cooking, about her soft bed, about all the reasons she should just lie down and sleep. She almost listened. Her body wanted it so badly that tears ran down her face. Sleep. Just a few minutes of sleep. What would it hurt? But she thought about Earth, about the billions of people depending on her to prove that humans were worth something, about the classification. That said, Her species was fragile and disposable. She thought about all the times in her life when she had wanted to quit. And she had not quit, and she had been glad afterward. No, she whispered into the darkness. I am not done. She kept moving. At hour 36, the Thorani finally broke. Its efficient, cold-blooded brain decided that survival required shutdown. Without any warning, it simply stopped moving and entered a deep torpor. Its body temperature dropped. Its heart slowed to almost nothing. It was technically still alive, but it was out of the competition. At hour 40, the synth surrendered. What was left of its body could barely hold together. It looked at Elia with something that might have been respect. I do not understand you, it said, its voice grinding like broken glass. You should have fallen long ago. Every measurement says you are weaker than me. Every number says I should win. But you are still standing, and I cannot stand any longer. Elia did not respond. She was saving every bit of energy for movement. Now only two remained. Elia and a Mortis splinter, a fragment of the spore cloud that had survived by breaking into smaller pieces. It floated through the arena like a ghost, barely conscious but still technically present. The final 8 hours were the longest of Elia's life. Her body stopped feeling like her own. She moved like a machine, going through the motions without really thinking about them. Her vision narrowed to a small tunnel. She could not remember her own name. She could only remember one thing. Keep moving. At hour 44, she fell. Her legs simply gave out. She collapsed onto the cold floor of the arena and lay there, staring up at the lights. Every part of her being wanted to stay down, to close her eyes, to let it end. But somewhere deep inside her, in a place that science could not measure and machines could not detect, something refused. She pushed herself up onto her hands and knees, then onto her feet. She was shaking so badly that she could barely stand, but she was standing. The Mortis splinter lasted until hour 47. Then, without warning, it simply dissolved. The spores drifted apart and fell to the ground like dust. It could not hold itself together any longer. Elia was alone. The final hour was a blur of pain and movement, and stubborn refusal to stop. She walked into walls. She fell and got back up. She completed challenges without remembering what they were. When the final buzzer sounded, she did not hear it at first. Her ears were ringing too loudly. But then she saw the lights change color, and she saw the doors open, and she understood. It was over. She had won. Elia collapsed onto the arena floor and did not move. Medical drones surrounded her, pumping her full of fluids and nutrients. Her vital signs were all over the place. Her body was damaged in ways that would take weeks to heal, but she was alive. And she had done what no one had believed possible. She woke up in a medical bay 3 days later. Chronicler Yith was sitting beside her bed, his black eyes unreadable. The coalition has made a decision, he said. Elia tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. A drone brought her water, and she drank deeply before asking, what decision? The Universal Power Index has been revised. A new category has been added, persistence rating. Yith paused. Humanity's score in this category has been listed as unranked. The ceiling has not been established. Elia let this sink in. What does that mean? It means that humans have been reclassified. Yith's mandibles clicked slowly. You are no longer fragile class. You have been given a new designation, one that has never been used before. What designation? Endurance Apex. Elia closed her eyes. She thought about all the humans who had come before her. The ones who had crossed deserts and climbed mountains. The ones who had survived plagues and wars and disasters. The ones who had kept going when everything said they should stop. What happens now? She asked. Now, Youth said, the galaxy learns something your species has always known. What is that? Yith was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. That the race does not always go to the swift, and the battle does not always go to the strong. Sometimes, the ones who win are simply the ones who refuse to stop. Alia smiled and let herself drift back to sleep. She had earned it.